Hi, guys. In today's show, we're going to be focusing on the protests happening in other countries. Now, the whole entire media spent last week talking about how the protests in Brazil were, quote, strikingly similar to the protests on January 6th, while at the same time trying to relate the protests to President Trump. Obviously, Trump has nothing to do with their protests, so that is pulled from their rear end. Nonetheless, let's dig into the rest of the protests happening in other countries around the world.
I got facts over tracks, this and that, spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could gas, think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past.
Moving into the first article, we actually have a Daily Wire article. This is a tremendous escalation. Iran plans warships in Panama Canal. Iran, the leading country in state-sponsored terrorism around the globe, is furthering its reach, announcing it will place warships in the Panama Canal this year. That announcement came on Wednesday from the commander of Iran's Navy, Rear Admiral Shahram Iranian. Today, we have great opportunity in the sea area for the development of the country, and we can turn this gift from an economic capacity into a civilizational capacity by using the maritime capacity property, Iranian stated, according to the Tehran Times. Today, the use of the sea is a geopolitical advantage for us, and those who do not have this capacity are suffering from geopolitical suffocation. So far, we have been present in all the strategic straits of the world, and we have not been present in only 2 straits, in one of which we will be present this year, and we are planning to be present in the Panama Canal. We have formed 3 oceanic commands, including the Indian Ocean Command, and the Pacific Ocean Command, and the Atlantic Ocean Command, he continued. Today, we are present in the Indian and Atlantic Oceans, and soon we will be present in the Pacific Ocean. Joseph Hamir, the executive director of the Center for a Secure Free Society, SFS, told the Washington Free Beacon that Iran's goal has always been to have a military presence in Latin America. So it's not surprising at all for its Navy to announce it's going to make moves on the Panama Canal. This is a tremendous escalation if it was to happen. So people may discount Iran's in terms of its capacities, but I would not discount it because they have been building this for a very long time. And this is absolutely right. If they have been building the military for a really long time, then why would we take their statements and discount them? No, we should take their statements and say, no, if they're going to escalate things, they're going to escalate things. Iranian's government has been making inroads in South America. Last June, Iran and Venezuela signed a 20-year strategic cooperation agreement. In December, Iran signed a similar treaty with Nigeria. In August, Brazilian Foreign Minister Carlos Alberto Francisca stated, "We are determined to shore up our relationships with the Islamic Republic of Iran in different areas, including political and economic areas." In October, Bolivia's ambassador to Iran, Romania Perez, supported the despotic Iran government as its violently suppressed protesters, tweeting, "Our government condemns the recent riots in Iran, which are orchestrated by the British and American Zionists. We are sure all problems will be resolved through solidarity and wisdom of the dear leader of Iran." So they basically just threaten their people. They say, no, if you're going to protest, be ready to face the consequences, which is good in some ways, but other ways, no, they're protesting because they do not like the way that you're governing. Moving into the next article, we actually have a CBS News article. We have dozens killed in protests against Peru's government as unrest continues. Protests against Peruvian President Dina Boluarte's government have left 47 people dead since they began a month ago, spread through the south of the Indian country on Wednesday, with the new clashes reported in the tourist city of Cusco. Health officials in Cusco said 16 civilians and 6 police officers were injured after protesters tried to take over the city's airport, where many foreign tourists arrived to see sights, including the nearby Incan Cadal of Machu Picchu. Protests and road blockades against Blériot and in support of ousted President Pedro Castillo were also seen in 41 provinces, mainly in Peru's south. The unrest began in early December following the destruction of and arrest of Castillo, Peru's first president of humble rural roots. Following his widely condemned attempt to dissolve Congress and head off his own impeachment, the protests, mainly in neglected rural areas of the country still loyal to Castillo, are seeking immediate elections. Blériot's resignation, Castillo's release, and justice for the protesters killed in clashes with police. Some of the worst protest violence came on Monday when 17 people were killed in clashes with police in the city of Jessia near Lake Titicaca, and protesters later attacked and burned a police officer to death. In total, Peru's ombudsman's office said that 39 civilians have been killed in clashes with police, and another 7 died in traffic incidents related to road blockades, as well as a fallen officer. Peru's government has announced a 3-day curfew from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. in Puno. The National Prosecutor's Office said that it requested information from the Presidency of the Council of Ministers in the defense of the Interior Ministries for an investigation it has opened up against Blériot and other officials for the protest deaths. In Juliaca in Peru province, a crowd marched alongside the coffins of 17 people killed in Monday's protest. Dina killed me with bullets, said a piece of paper attached to a coffin of Ebrinish Mamini Akuri. And I'm butchering their name, so God bless you. In a reference to Peru's current president. This democracy is no longer a democracy, chanted the relatives of victims. As they passed a police station, which was guarded by dozens of officers, the marchers yelled, "Murderers!" Meanwhile, a delegation from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights began a visit to Peru to look into protesters and the police response. Blériot was Castillo's former running mate before taking over the presidency. She has said that she supports a plan to push up to 2024 elections for president and Congress, originally scheduled for 2026. She also expressed support in judicial investigations into whether security forces acted with excessive force. But such moves have so far failed to quell the unrest, which, after a short respite around the Christmas and New Year's holidays, have resumed with force in some of Peru's poorest areas. Castillo, a political novice who lived in a 2-story adobe home in the Indian Highlands before moving to the presidential palace, eked out a narrow victory in elections in 2021 that rocked Peru's political establishment and laid bare the deep divisions between residents of the capital, Lima, and the long neglected countryside. So I completely agree. The people have the right to protest their own government. If they do not like the way that the government is treating them, then they have the complete right to protest. Moving on to the next article, we actually have a Daily Wire article. We will not be Venezuela. Bolivians erupt in protest following arrest of governor socialist opposition leader. On the afternoon of December 28th, Luis Fernando Camacho was riding in his car and was a half a block from his home when an unmarked white van pulled in front of him. Armed men dressed in black jumped out. They rushed Camacho's car, smashing his windows and demanding he get out. Camacho calmly replied, "I'm here. You don't need to do any more." The men responded with violence, throwing Camacho to the ground. They handcuffed his arms behind his back and drove him away. Not having any information, one would be forgiven for thinking that Camacho must be a drug kingpin or some other nefarious actor, but no, he is the current governor of the Department of Santa Cruz, Bolivia. Bolivia has 9 departments. They're a version of states, and Santa Cruz is the largest and most populous of the departments. Not only that, but it is also the richest and most productive development in Bolivia. In 2021, Camacho won his election with 55% of the vote and became governor of the department. Camacho came to prominence politically in 2019. Protests has erupted throughout the nation in response to alleged overt electoral fraud. The common refrain in Santa Cruz during the protests was, "We will not be Venezuela." Camacho took on a leadership role in the opposition to then President Evo Morales. With the country rolled in protest, Camacho traveled to La Paz, the capital, and went to the government palace with a Bible and a letter for resignation for the president to sign. But Morales had already fled. Many high-ranking officials resigned, including the president and vice president. The Bolivian constitution was followed to find the line of succession, and Jeanine Áñez, the second vice president of the Senate, became interim president. But even though most of its leadership resigned and fled, their Socialist Party remained in control of many systems of power in Bolivia. In 2020, elections were held, and the Socialist Party won back the presidency. A few months later, after regaining power, they arrested the interim president, Áñez, and she remains incarcerated to this day. She had been accused of inciting and supposed co-op dictate of Evo Morales, with additional counts of terrorism and seduction. And now they have taken Camacho prisoner as well. They have sequestered the opposition leader to the socialist government. The men dressed in black with assault rifles driving an unmarked van were actually police officers sent from the federal government to arrest Camacho. Allegedly, no arrest warrant was presented at the time of his sudden arrest, but an arrest warrant was drafted back in October. The civic leaders in the city of Santa Cruz, however, did not like to call it an arrest since he is the rightfully elected governor of the Department of Santa Cruz. Instead, they call it a political kidnapping. It sounds like it was a political kidnapping. You just took some random guy and instead of saying, here's your rights, here's your Amanda rights, no, you just arrest him. This is why we love America so much, is because of the freedoms and the rights that you have that other countries just don't have. In response to the unrest, the people of Santa Cruz immediately started protesting and demanding the release of the government they elected. They have said that the federal government is politically prosecuting the entire Department of Santa Cruz by the arrest, and that they are willing to defend democracy no matter the cost. As the protests continued, there were increasing claims of abuse and violence from the police against the protesters. Videos have surfaced of the police lighting cars on fire, destroying street signs, and even lighting their own motorcycles on fire. The claim was if the police can demonstrate violence on the part of the people of Santa Cruz, then they can bring in the military to turn Santa Cruz into a police state. That's disgusting. That's literally Venezuela at that point. Burned out cars now litter on the street, and the city looks as though a war had already started. Tear gas is used so often that the neighborhoods have started putting out barrels of water ready to extinguish the grenades. And yet, in the face of opposition and violence, the people of Santa Cruz will continue to protest and march, saying that they will not stop until the political prisoners are released. And at this point, though, it does not seem like the federal government is budging either. The government is attempting to mediate and terrorize the people so that nobody would dare to stand up to them, which is not how it's supposed to work. The people have the power, not the government. The government works for the people. For the people, by the people. This creates a very dangerous situation for the people of Bolivia. When the tensions are high, any little mistake can cause an incredible amount of loss of life. Governor Camacho has a blood disorder for which he requires medical treatment. If, by accident, Camacho was to die, the Bolivian people would not believe that it was an accident. They would believe he was murdered by the government. This would quickly dissolve into an actual civil war. And the people are ready to fight for this. All these people can stand up against the police officers. What are you going to kill the whole entire country? No, you can't do that. And at some point, America likes to get themselves into wars. They're going to get themselves into this war. That is a tight rope that the civic leaders in Santa Cruz are attempting to traverse. They are attempting to balance peacefully protesting to obtain the release of the government that they elected, while at the same time, if they push too hard, they can be blamed for some violence. Then the government will have the pretext for sending the military in to oppress the population. But the Bolivian people have done it before, and they can do it again. They joined together with one voice to protest socialist leader and dictator Evo Morales, and he had to resign. The people of Santa Cruz need to arrest of the rest of Bolivia to join them, and they have started to do just that. More and more cities and departments are protesting and marching in solidarity with Santa Cruz, but more importantly, against opposition. Even as the government tries to scare the population into submission, the Bolivian people are coming together once again to fight against the socialist tyranny. Michael Warren lived in Santa Cruz, Bolivia for 5 years and continues to have close contact with his family and friends here. He recently released a new book titled Live Deliberately, a professional land survivor. He lives in Santa Monica, California with his wife, Ether, and his 2 kids, Daniel and Zoe. So I completely agree with everything that was in this article. The people deserve to fight for their right to have fair in just elections. They deserve that. That's the people. They pay the taxes of the people that represent them or are supposed to represent them. Now moving into the next article from the Daily Wire, we actually have China's white paper protests are a preview of the soft desperation coming for America. The West may be tempted to think that the recent angry and seemingly fearless protests against dozens of China's major cities over the prolonged procedural lockdowns might pose a real threat to dictator Xi Jinping's tyrannical rule. Chinese political commentators living overseas who harbor a deep hatred to the murderous party and its dictatorship share the same irresistible temptation for the Chinese who desire freedom. How could they not hate the evil CCP and hope for its demise? But I do not share this temptation. One must understand the nature of the protests, unclouded by wishful thinking, to make a reasonable judgment of what has happened in China and what will happen in the future. For the first time, slogans like "Down with the CCP" and "Down with Xi Jinping" was chanted. The protests here, however, were not political movements by venting anger. They lacked specific political objectives and demands that can only be answered by changes of a political nature. Perhaps the biggest diversity was and is the lack of support from the masses. Historically, the masses have been the only force that stood a chance of making a political impact. Sadly, the Chinese masses of today are no longer up to the job. Having been tamed by decades by the CCP, the Chinese masses refer to themselves as Lao Beijing. The concept of Lao Beijing denotes a unique political being. They are ruled by a class in a caste society who voluntarily submit to the ruling class, i.e. the CCP. Who are those people? They are the 950 million Chinese people who live on a monthly income of 2,000 yuan or $300 US. According to the National Statistical Bureau's 2020 yearbook, they are also the 200 million migrant workers, largely a rural populace, whose life goal is to return to the countryside to build a nice house after they have earned enough money from the working in cities. They are poorly educated and financially limited. They are not technically savvy and therefore bereft of the capacity of climbing over the Great Firewall, accessing information that will help them resist state propaganda. They certainly have no knowledge of Twitter and the other apps used outside of China. These people, whom I know very well because I live among them, know very little about the real world, nor do they care to know. People from my hometown cooperatively locked themselves at home simply because the government asked them to do so. Do not assume that the middle-class Chinese desire freedom or democracy. Freedom is too costly. It requires tremendous sacrifice and pursuit, as evidenced in Conger's defense against the CCP tyranny and brutality in 2018. Democracy is also costly. It demands no small amount of time and effort to participate in common affairs or deliberation in the public sphere. On most occasions, the middle class is unconcerned with political deprivation so long as their purchasing power is guaranteed and increasing. What they have grown astonished is is despotism, or as Tocqueville writes, a soft despotism that provides them with stability and security. Modern American liberals are no different. True, it seems like some college students are awakening from their apathy towards politics. They do cry out for freedom and democracy this time, but those slogans carry very little substance, if any. The freedom they seek is essentially a license to do what they want, similar to how American millennials and Gen Zers understand the world. The freedom of American founding fathers fought so hard for, on the other hand, is completely different species. It is a self-rule and self-reliance. Freedom of the nature has never been in the Chinese nation's DNA. White paper revolution. At the peak of the protests, a resident living in Chengdu, China, asked me if China should anticipate an upheaval in the future. No, I said. The white paper protests were by nature different from the Tiananmen Square protests. Students of the 1980s have been very political preceding the protests. The 1980s were the only period of time through the CCP's reign when China was relatively free. Professors, mostly American educated, were allowed to teach separation of power, rule of law, and freedom of speech. Students authentically read Western political philosophies and deliberated with each other on campus. They were idealists who wanted to bring liberty to China. Today, Chinese college students born at the dawn of the 21st century are growing up in a world of comfort, entertainment, and various consumptions, are materialistic and would love to migrate to the Western countries if they can. They are not rebels, let alone revolutionaries. Since the Tiananmen massacre, there have been despaired protests throughout the past 3 decades. Chinese individuals or certain groups, such as Falun Gong protectors, took their oppositions to the streets. Their actions were received with imprisonment and torture. Their voices echoed into a void. And the other Chinese, whose self-interests were not affected, stood aloof. This time is different, though. All Chinese were in grave peril of their lives and livelihoods. It's predictable some urban residents were emboldened to challenge state power at the magnitude not seen since 1989. But one must ask if repression is imposed only upon certain groups. Would there still be a nationwide protest? Let me just break this down. So what he's asking here is, if they were to actually have power, would there still be nationwide protests? I would think that, listen, like I think about, and I'm thinking about this in a very, very American way. People have the power against the president or the leader or the presidency or any government official throughout the government that is paid by the people. The people pay the taxes, then the government should go by what the people want. That's how it should be. The question was in fact answered a long time ago, when millions of Uyghurs were corralled within labor camps for years. The Han Chinese were either apathetic towards the suffering of a people whom many of them regarded as inferior, or they supported the government for taking necessary action on the alleged Uyghur separatists and terrorists. In 2019, when the police brutally attacked Hong Kong protesters, the mainland Chinese, including many of the other white paper protesters, believed the subjection was justified. Hong Kongers' alleged sectionalist attempt must be stamped down. When circumstances change, the mainland Chinese can swiftly switch into Zhejiang nationalists. I wonder how many Chinese Gen Zers or millennials have knowledge of the dark history of the CCP's heinous crimes committed against its own people. Here is one example, perhaps lesser known to the West than the Cultural Revolution of the Tiananmen massacre. During the period of the first land reform 1947 to 1953, i.e., the nationalization of the land, an estimated 8 million landlords and their families were killed. These so-called landlords, in fact, were free peasants who owned small pieces of land. There was never a peasant landlord class system in China, similar to the one that existed in federal Europe. Rural China consisted of a vast number of farming villages where free peasants farmed their own land, occasionally with the help of hired laborers. Taking away the land was not enough. The oppressed class must be taught to hate the oppressing class. The communists turned the masses into an enraged mob who shot, strangled, dismembered, and burned alive the other Chinese. Each killing was designed to be a spectacle. A rally was gathered. Adults and children were asked to witness the condemnation, torture, and final execution, which is very disgusting and evil, if you were to ask me. The sheer savory in the wickedness exhibited in those rallies are what make it so difficult for me to finish researching the subject. Within 3 years of founding of the PRC, the coercive social class viewed the glossary of villages, which united and regulated rural society since the Han Dynasty 202 BC to 220 AD, had simply ceased to exist, gone with the demise of the generative class, where morals developed throughout thousands of years. I do not think Gen Zers and millennials have adequate knowledge of the long list of CCP's crimes. If they had, we wouldn't see the last line printed on some sort of white paper that reads, "We love freedom and we love the party and the country." It seems that they want to appeal to the party's tender feelings that unfortunately only exist with their imaginations. A party that was able to kill the youth with tanks and machine guns is a butcher who has no feelings. The myth of freedom. The white paper protests invoked free speech as a human right in support of their case. I do not think that free speech is a human right. Human rights are what we are entitled to merely by virtue of being human. All liberties are political rights. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution takes in the roots of a character named Magna Carta that was first signed in 1215 by England's King John in rebellious land barons. Future legislation would extend those rights. In the Petition of the Right 1628 and Habeas Corpus Act 1679, in 1776, American colonists invoked the Magna Carta to justify their rebellion against the American crown, who usurped the political rights they inherited as Englishmen. I do not regard the American founding fathers as revolutionaries in the sense of the French Revolution, overthrowing the Ancien regime. They were conservatives who valued their deceptive English way of living so much that they were willing to sacrifice their lives to preserve it, in which I would do the same. Due to the strong commitment to freedom, not license, America was founded on one principle: to protect individuals from tyranny of government. Today, in America, however, is coming very close to the end of self-rule and self-relevance. Freedom has never existed in China throughout its 4 millennia history. There was rebellions, but no rebels signed a covenant with the ruler in exchange for rights. They simply became the successors. The cycle goes on. Will there be rebels in the future of fighting the CCP tyrant at all costs in spite of the terror in exchange for political rights? My answer is no. This generation of idealists will never return to an age of consumerism. Humans have become soft, wanting to be taken care of and provided for, regardless of what type of regimes they live in. American liberals are no different. Tocqueville's foresight has now become reality. How can one deny the fact that Americans are living in the Tocqueville calls nepotism? I see an incredible crowd of similar and equal men who spin around restlessly in order to gain small and vulgar pleasures with which they fill their souls. Above these men arises an immerse in totalitarian power that alone takes change of assuming their enjoyment in of looking after their fate. After having thus taken each individual one by one into its powerful hands and having molded him as it pleases, the sovereign power extends its arms over the entire society, and it finally reduces each nation to being nothing more than a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which the government is a shepherd. Freedom of perseverance. I hope Americans bear in mind the words of President Reagan. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same thing. If there is one thing American college students can learn from what is happening in their Chinese counterparts, it is this: do not take America for granted. And I don't take America for granted. I think everybody should listen to this article as a huge wake-up call. And it's a big slap in the face, honestly, because it's telling us, listen, you need to wake up, America. You need to wake up and realize that our freedoms are not 100%. We need to keep fighting and keep making sure that our freedoms do not go anywhere. Now, moving on to the next article, we actually have another Daily Wire article. Like, Daily Wire is doing really good. Well, wait, actually, yeah, Daily Wire is actually doing really good, but I need to go to the next one. We actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So number 5, we have, no, I think it's number 4. Number 4, no, it's number 5. Blinken reacts to Iran abolishing morality police. We have to see how it actually plays out in practice. So, what do you mean? Okay, so what do you mean? Let's see how it plays out in practice. No, you're not going to tell us what to do with our own you're not going to tell us what to do. There's no such thing as morality police. So if there is, they need to be resigned immediately. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken expressed skepticism after reports surfaced of Iran abolishing the so-called morality police. Blinken reacted to the breaking news Sunday morning on CBS's Face the Nation. Blinken was cautiously optimistic that the move could be a step in the right direction. However, he urged caution in reacting too quickly, saying that this does not guarantee that the protests would stop, and I agree. Does this stop the protests that have been raging? Asked host Margaret Brennan. That's up to the Iranian people. It's about them, said Blinken. It's not about us. And what we have seen since the killing of Mahsa Amini has been the extraordinary courage of the Iranian people, especially women, who have been landing these protests, standing up for the right to be able to say what they want to say, hear what they want to wear, what they want to wear. And so if the regime has now responded in some fashion to the protests, that could be a positive thing. But we have to see how it actually plays out in practice and what the Iranian people think this is about them. And it's up to them. Iran abolished its morality police early Sunday morning, a top official reportedly said, after months of protests setting off by the death of a woman who was taken into custody for allegedly violating the country's dress code. Attorney General Mohammad Jafar Martenzi announced the decision at a religious conference on Sunday when asked if the morality police tasked with enforcing Iranians' Islamic dress code would be disbanded. According to BBC Persian, Iranian state media outlets reported the news late Saturday night. The morality police had nothing to do with the judiciary and have been shut down from where they were set up, he said. The report stressed that control of the force sits within the jurisdiction of the Interior Ministry, and other agencies have not confirmed the fate of the morality police. The protest began in September when a 22-year-old woman named Mahsa Amini died under mysterious circumstances while visiting the capital city of Tehran. As the Daily Wire reported, Amini was thrown into a van owned by the morality police, which enforces the authoritarian Islamic regime's strict dress code. The hospital she was taken to declared her brain dead upon her arrival, prompting Iranian descendants to claim that she was murdered, which that is murder. If you're responsible for somebody's death, you murder them. Protests erupted soon afterward, in which protesters burned the compulsory hijab in the streets as a symbol of solidarity. And I completely agree. I would fight with them if I was in Iran. Moving on to the next article, we actually have Chinese protesters destroy COVID site as police hazmat suits deploy to city street. Anti-government protesters in communist China flipped over and destroyed a COVID testing tent in the city of Guangzhou on Monday, prompting police and hazmat suits to flood the streets and disperse the crowds. Videos on Twitter confirmed by journalist William Yang of the Taiwan Foreign Correspondents Club showed protesters flipping over a COVID testing center, while others looked on and recorded the show of defiance. The demonstrators also reportedly flipped over a vehicle before dozens of police officers swarmed the scene in riot gear and hazmat suits. Now, I do want to see these couple of videos right here. Okay, so basically what we see in the video is them just pushing over the tents. And now we see a bunch of hazmat suit people telling them to get back, even though they're not even doing anything. And then everybody just gets scared and just steps back. So all of these people are in hazmat suits. Yeah, so if you upset the Chinese government, then they're gonna fight back, and they have no remorse. Witnesses said police forcefully checked people's phones looking for footage of protests to stop the videos from spreading on social media, the New York Post reported. Authorities have also reportedly...
Jaden Virgo.
Witnesses, the New York Post reported. Authorities have also reportedly used cell phone videos as proof to take people into custody for attending a demonstration. Most of the protests remained quiet as protesters held up white sheets of paper, a subtle but symbolic challenge that has been taken hold among descendants throughout the country, but some protesters have become bolder in their anti-government demonstrations in Shanghai. Some have openly shouted at President Xi Jinping to step down, while others have chanted "Need human rights, need freedom." In 2018, China's puppet legislature eliminated the president's term limits, and Xi began his third term in October. Police hit the streets in full force in Shanghai and Beijing on Monday and Tuesday, attempting to prevent the people from gathering again. Universities in the city sent students home amid the unrest, while the schools said students were being sent away due to COVID precautions. Fewer students in cities also reduces the number of possible protesters, the Associated Press reported. The protests that have spread to at least 16 cities across China began after 10 people died in an apartment fire in China's western Xinjiang province. Many blame the communist regime zero COVID lockdown policy for why first responders did not reach the blaze in time to save those who perished. Nearly 3 years since the onset of the COVID pandemic, the Chinese people have been subjected to extreme restrictions that locked them in their homes for as long as 100 days at a time. This is absurd. In the eyes of COVID, this is just absurd. I just cannot believe I just can't believe this. 100 days at a time in your house, and you're locked in your house. They literally cemented the doors shut of some buildings. This is very disappointing. And this is exactly why in America, we really, really, really need to not only focus on ourselves, but also focus on all of these different countries that are fighting for their rights. I've ran over Peru, Iran, Venezuela, China, and Chile all protesting their government, but of course the media would rather focus on protests that are happening within the United States and neglect all those other events, even though those other events matter way more than January 6th, even though they would like to celebrate the first year birthday of January 6th this year and not talk about any other country in the whole entire world. Thank you all for watching, and I hope that this spread some light on the other protests that are happening in other countries, because America is sadly not the only country. Thank you all for watching, and I hope they have a great rest of your day. Hey, were you really going to click off this video before leaving a like and subscribing down below? Wow, so rude.